We may be ruffling some feathers with this video, but everything you know about these Schwintek slideouts is probably wrong. The internet's gonna tell you that they're garbage and they're destined for failure, but most of the failures on these things can be attributed to either faulty installation at the RV manufacturer or something simple that you're doing wrong every single time you operate one of these things. All right, after editing a good portion of this video, I wanna just pause here for a second and mention a couple of things. So number one, I wanna make it clear that I am not a Lippert cheerleader. I think Lippert has a lot of improvements they can make in a lot of different areas. So that's number one. Number two is this video is very long. I get it, but basically, you can look at this video as everything that the average RV owner needs to know about their Schwintek slide-out systems, from maintenance to operation and inspections, and then even what to do when you get yourself in a jam. So at a minimum, I would recommend watching this through the maintenance and inspections and the things that can go wrong and how to properly operate them. Obviously, I'd like you to go on and watch the parts about what you can do if these things aren't operating normally, but at the bare minimum, bookmark this video for future use because there are a lot of problems out there with these slides, and this video is going to help you work through those problems and get you back on the road when you're stuck in a campground. So today what we're going to do is look at some basic maintenance and inspection items you can do on these things, as well as how to operate them properly so that you minimize how often these things fail. And then as an added bonus, we're going to take a look at some temporary fixes that you can do when you find yourself in that position where your slide won't move in or out. But first I want to go over just some real basic components here, and all we're going to look at is really just all the things that you can see without having to disassemble this system. I promise this is going to be pretty high level, but it's important that we understand what we're looking at here when we start talking about what we need to be inspecting and maintaining on these slide systems. All right, the first component here is this column itself. Now there's really not a lot to look at here visually, but this is going to be important here in just a little bit when we start talking about doing measurements on this to make sure that this thing is installed correctly in the rough opening or in that hole that's cut in the sidewall. So we'll come back to this in just a couple of minutes. Next, we're looking at the gear rack itself along the side. Now, one of the most obvious things that you can see on this thing is all of these screws. And we wanna make sure that all of the screws are installed. These things have a tendency to come out. And what I mean by that is there's really no torque spec on these screws. So manufacturers like to get in there with like an impact screwdriver and then just drive these things in as tight as they'll go. And then what ends up happening is as this thing, moves in and out, you're traveling down the road and so forth, these screw heads will tend to pop off just because they've been over torqued at the factory. Now, if that happens and you notice that you've got a screw missing, basically what Lippert recommends is one of two things. So number one, you can try and drill that screw out of there and then put a new bigger screw in its place. Or you can just simply take some sealant that you would use, say, around your windows or whatever it is that you use on the outside of your RV, and then just fill that hole in with that sealant. And then what you do is just go over about an inch or so, drill yourself a new hole and put a new screw in there. It's really that easy. The second thing we want to look at with these gear racks is we want to make sure there's not excessive wear on here. Now, over time, they will wear down a little bit, but what we want to look for really is to make sure that that wear is going right down the middle of this gear rack here. You don't want to see a lot of wear on the top or the bottom, because if that's the case, basically what that means is that inside of the column here, where that bearing block is, something's misaligned in there and it's causing that uneven wear, and that's going to cause problems down the line. Now, you might see some black stuff inside of this gear rack here. That's nothing to worry about. That's totally normal. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking for any kind of actual wear on this thing that indicates there's a problem, probably somewhere inside of the column. The next thing we want to take a look at here on the outside is if you pull this little piece of seal back here, you can see right inside there is this thing called a V-roller. I don't know how that's going to show up on here, but you want to take a look at that V-roller and verify that there's no flat spots on it. Now, obviously, when this thing's sitting still like this, you can only see just one part of that V-roller. But if you were to kind of get down underneath it here and look at this while you're operating this slide in or out, then you can see that V-roller actually turning, and then you'd be able to see if there's any flat spots on it. And the purpose of that gear roller is basically to just ride right along the bottom side of this gear rack, and it just provides that smooth motion in and out. So obviously, if it's developing a flat spot, that means that it's not able to turn as easily as it should, or maybe it's just become bound up completely, and you'd be able to hear that if it's making some wonky noises in there, that could have some flat spots on it. And obviously, if it has developed those flat spots, then this thing's not really gonna move in and out as smoothly as it should. All right, the next thing we're gonna take a look at is up underneath, you're gonna have one of two things. You're gonna have either a glide bar like we have in this rig, or you're gonna have rollers. And what we're looking at for here on these rollers should be about 6 inches in from the edge of this rough opening in the sidewall. So basically you measure over about 6 inches from there, and the roller should be right in about that position. Same for the roller on the other side. And then between those, you should have a roller about every 24 to 36 inches across the entire span of this opening. And this is super important because the rollers, or the glide bar in our case, is what supports the weight of this slide. And it's important that these components are supporting the weight instead of the components inside of that column, because those components in the column are not designed to support the weight of the slide. Their only purpose is to move this slide in and out. So if your slide is not resting firmly on either those rollers or this glide bar, that means there's extra weight that's being placed on those internal components inside of that column, and eventually it's just going to cause them to break. All right, next we're going to talk about some real simple basic measurements that you can do, and that's basically going to tell us just whether this slide is in straight or if it's maybe cocked a little bit, because if that slide isn't installed properly and it's cocked, that's gonna cause, again, a bunch of wear on the components that are inside of the column here. So these measurements are pretty easy to take, and what we're looking at here is we wanna measure from the outside face of this gear rack to the outside edge of the column. And what we wanna see is about 2.5 inches plus or minus 1/8 of an inch. So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna take our tape measure and put it right up against the gear rack, just like this, and we're measuring right to the edge of the column. Now I can't see what that reads right now. This one was pretty close, but that's a simple measurement that we can take. Now we have at least 8 inspection points per Schwintek slide. And that's because there's a gear rack on the bottom, there's a gear rack on the top of this slide. And what we wanna do is take this measurement with this slide fully extended, and then we want to take that same measurement with this slide sitting out about 6 inches or so. Okay, so now let's talk about some common problems that many people see on these slides. And again, these common problems are usually due to either this thing being installed incorrectly at the manufacturer, or you're just not operating it the way that it's intended to be operated. So number one, you might see this thing jerking or stuttering as it comes out, or maybe it's just slow to come in or out. And that could be one of several things. So number one is it could be a low battery voltage in your rig. So your house batteries need to be in good condition and fully charged when you operate these things, because your converter just doesn't provide enough power to drive these things in and out. So it draws that power from the battery, and if that battery voltage is low, it can cause that stuttering as it comes in or out, or it just may move very slowly, or it may not move at all. Another thing that might cause it to come in and out slowly or be jerky in its operation is just a physical obstruction. So you always want to make sure that before you operate these slides, you just got to make sure that there's nothing in the way, both inside and outside. And then the last thing that might cause this is if the motors that drive these things in and out are out of sync. Now this happens quite a bit, and this is almost always because you're not operating this system correctly. Now we're going to get to that here in just a little bit about how these things are designed to be operated and what Lippert recommends when you're extending and retracting these slides. So we'll come back to that. Another very common issue is that these things don't go in and out evenly. So the left side may go in slower or faster than the right side, or they're both going in at the same speed. It's just that they're off. So the slide is actually going in kind of at an angle. And again, one of the reasons for this is that those motors have become out of sync because we're just not operating this system the way it's designed to be operated. And then another common problem that will cause that thing to go in and out crooked is a damaged wiring harness. And I've seen this actually a few times, both on my rig personally and on customers' rigs. If those wiring harnesses become damaged, or if they have a loose connection, that can cause those motors to kind of start and stop because that motor's just got some kind of intermittent connection. And we're going to take just a little bit of a deeper look at those motors later when we talk about how to fix some of these common issues. All right, next up is when these things just start making wonky noises. So the first thing that it could be is it could be that the gears are just misaligned in here, like it's skipping teeth as it's going in and out. And that could be a couple of different things going on on in there. So again, number one, the motor synchronization could be off. And if you haven't noticed yet, that motor synchronization is super important because it can cause all kinds of different scenarios on here that are just not good for this slide system. The second reason that could be happening is this whole thing was just installed properly. They don't have it in there square. They don't have the right tolerances on either side. So again, the two biggest problems that Lippert sees with these slide out systems is improper operation and improper installation. And then a couple of other things that could cause those wonky noises is, again, number one, this V-roller that's inside. If that thing has got some flat spots on it, then obviously when it rolls in and out, it's either going to be kind of flopping over that flat spot, or it's just going to be like kind of scraping along the bottom side of this. And then the last thing that can cause just some weird noises here is if all this stuff just gets fouled up with dirt and grime and whatever else finds its way in there. And this is probably going to be a little bit of a controversial topic as well, because a lot of people out there swear up and down that you got to be lubricating this system. And then the other half of the people are going to say, hey, nope, there should be no lubrication in here whatsoever. That's not how they're designed. That is true. Lippert has designed the system and they recommend that you do not lubricate these in any way at all. Now, having said that, I've done videos in the past about lubricating this, and a lot of people do, and a lot of people swear by it. So I guess what my advice here is, if you're one of those people that likes to lubricate these things, make sure, number one, it's a dry lube. But the most important thing that we want to do here is we just want to make sure that all of this is clean all the time. We don't want to allow a bunch of gunk and dirt built up in there, because that's just going to gum everything up in here and it's going to cause problems. Now, if I had to put out a formal recommendation on this, I would go with the Lippert's guidance and I would say, do not lubricate these with anything, just keep them clean. Okay, the next common problem, and really the one that's the hardest to deal with, is if this slide out just will not move in or out. And that could be one of, several different things wrong with this thing. But first of all, you could have inside of here where the gears meet this gear rack, that could be misaligned, or those gears could just be worn to the point where they're not making contact and it's not driving this in and out. The second really common problem here is that motor can either become physically disengaged inside of that column, or it might not be getting the right electrical signal. That's actually really common because the wiring harnesses on the tops of those motors like to just kind of disconnect themselves from all that constant, motion of the slide going in and out and rolling down the road. And then the last thing I want to talk about as far as this thing just not moving at all is the controller might be faulty itself. So each one of these Schwintek slides has its own controller. Now, who knows where that controller is? Manufacturers put these things in the darndest places. So I can't tell you where your slide out motor controllers are located. All I can tell you is that if you have 3 Schwintek slides, you've got 3 motor controllers. Now, a quick note on those controllers is Lippert claims they have less than a 1% failure rate on the controllers themselves. So if you do have an issue, it's probably not going to be the controller that's broken, but you still need to know where they are because you need to be able to access them in order to troubleshoot these slide outs. So real quick, I'll just show you where the controller is for this slide out here. I have to open this baggage door right here, and then I have to come up underneath, and it's all the way up here mounted to the floor of the kitchen. So this is one of the easier ones to find, but I've seen in internet forums where people have looked for these things for weeks and nobody can tell them where they're at. I've even read where they've contacted the manufacturer and the manufacturer didn't even know where they are. So they can be difficult to find. I wish I could tell you where yours is, but I can't. Okay, so again, we know that the 2 most common problems are either manufacturer installation problems or operational problems by the user. So let's go inside and take a look at how we properly extend and retract these Schwintek slides. All right, so in a lot of these rigs, you can operate these slides from a couple of different locations. So number one is if you've got the ability to do this, you can do it from the One Control app. Actually, I think it's called Compass Connect now. I don't really know. Or you can go to the actual control panel. Ours is right inside the front door. I'm going to use the app itself, but no matter how you do this, you're going to go through the same basic procedure here. It's really simple. There's just one thing that a lot of people don't do, and it's critical to keep these things operating correctly long term. So basically what we're going to do is we're just going to draw this slide out all the way in. And when it's in the fully in position, what we're gonna hear is the motors are gonna cut out. They're gonna time out. And once we hear them time out like that, we're gonna continue to push this button for 5 seconds. And basically what that allows them to do is synchronize with each other. So let's just draw this slide in and see what that looks like. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those motors should cut out at the same time, and the slide should stop moving in at the same time on both sides. And if they don't stop at the same time, then we need to go through sort of a calibration procedure that we'll talk about here in just a few minutes. So now we're just gonna reverse that process. We're gonna put this thing all the way out. And again, once it gets all the way out, we wanna make sure that those motors cut out at the same time. We wanna visually see it stop at the same time on both sides. And we also wanna keep that button held for an additional 5 seconds. One, 2, 3, 4, 5. So in addition to making sure they stop at the same time, you should also be just verifying that it's moving evenly in and out. Candace is normally the one that operates these from the inside. A lot of times I'll be outside, but one thing I like to do is just stand at the end of the slide and watch it come out like this, because then I can see visually the distance between the wall and the trim piece on the edge of the slide and make sure that that thing's going in and out evenly. So now let's talk about what to do if you notice that this slide is not coming in or out evenly, meaning, you know, maybe one side is coming in faster, or maybe one side is just a little bit ahead of the other and it's just coming in a little bit crooked. And that's not good, because like I said, that's going to be placing undue stress on those components that are internal to that vertical column. So what we're going to do in this case is what they call a synchronizing procedure. And this is really simple to do. And you can actually do this in the in or out position. And because I just put this thing out, we're just going to do this in the out position. But just realize you can do this either from the fully retracted position or the fully extended position. So the synchronizing procedure is pretty simple. So what we want to do is essentially just bring this slide in about 3 to 6 inches, stop it, and then take it all the way back out. And we want to continue doing that until we see and hear this slide get to the fully extended position at the same time on both sides. And then once we have that, then what we'll do is we'll bring this slide fully in and then fully back out. So if you're doing this procedure from the fully retracted position, it's just kind of opposite. You're going to take this thing from fully retracted out 3 to 6 inches, back all the way in, and you want to repeat that again until both motors time out and both sides of the slide stop moving at the same time. And don't forget, every single time that slide is fully retracted or fully extended, you still need to hold that button for 5 seconds. And then again, if you're doing it from the fully retracted position, once those motors time out at the same time, once they stop at the same time, then you'll do a full cycle on this thing. You'll extend that slide all the way out and then all the way back in. And that's all there is to this synchronization procedure. So we're gonna bring it in about 6 inches. And we'll say that's good. We'll go fully out. Three, 4, 5, let go. All right, now mine is synchronized, so I'm gonna stop it there. But if yours is still not fully synchronized, then just continue this process until those motors are all synced up. And then again, the final thing is to draw this thing all the way in and then all the way back out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we're gonna go back out. 2, 3, 4, 5. That's all there is to the synchronization process. Okay, let's shift gears now and talk about the manual electric override on this thing, because this can be used in a pinch if we're having a problem with our slide system. And this controller is going to do a couple of different things for us. So number one, it's got a series of fault codes on it. And if you look at those fault codes, depending on how many times the red LED blinks in here, that's going to correspond to a fault code. So I'm not going to go super in depth about these fault codes, but I just wanted to let you know that it's here for reference. So that can really tell us a lot about what's going on with this slide if it won't come in or out. The other thing that we can do is we can use this thing for a little bit of troubleshooting as well. So again, like I said, we're talking about the manual electric override procedure, and that's where we kind of activate that feature of this controller. So right here you can see there's like a rectangular hole in this thing, and right up here it says how to manually override. Press this button 6 times and hold down on the 7th press until the lights start to flash. So if we were to look inside here, on the right side of this little hole, there's a little gray button. Now they may not all be gray, I don't know, but this one specifically has a little gray button. So if we just put our finger in there and we push this button 7 times and we hold it on that 7th time until the lights start flashing, that puts us into that manual override mode. And then what that does for us is it basically overrides all of the interlocks in here. So things like high motor current or low battery voltage, high battery voltage, whatever this thing is sensing as a problem, if we put it in a manual electric override, it will bypass all of those interlocks and it will allow us to still move that slide. Potentially. But the key here is that you've got 45 seconds from putting this thing into manual override to getting that slide going in the in or out direction. All right, so I'm going to put the camera up here and we'll see if we can kind of see what this looks like when I put this into manual override. Now, I'm not going to go operate my slides in manual override because that could potentially mess up my synchronization, but I just wanted to show you what this looks like when we put it in a manual electric override. Okay, so again, all we're going to do is press this button inside here 7 times, and on the 7th time, we're going to hold it in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, I don't know if you can see the lights, but we'll see them here in just a second. All right, we see those red and green lights flashing, and now we're in manual override, and we'd have 45 seconds to operate that slide. Now, I can't promise that that manual override procedure is going to work for you. I can't promise it's going to make that slide move, but more often than not, it will. But it's another tool in our toolbox when we have a problem with these slides. All right, one more thing that we can do with this controller as part of our troubleshooting process is we can use this to kind of isolate whether our problem is with the motor itself, or maybe the wiring harness that connects the motor to the controller, or maybe it's the controller itself. And here's how we do this. So we've got 2 wiring harnesses coming out of the bottom here. So we've got motor number 1 and motor number 2. So let's just say, for example, motor 1 is the left-hand motor on the slide when you're looking at it from the outside, and motor number 2 is the right-hand motor. So let's say that motor number 1 is operating just fine. So that side of the slide starts to come in, but the right side of the slide either comes in kind of jerky, or maybe it just doesn't move at all. In that situation, what we can do is just come down here and we can swap these connections right here. So basically now what we're doing is we're taking the power that normally goes to motor number 1 and we're going to send it to number 2, and we're taking the power that normally goes to number 2 and we're going to send it over to motor number 1. So we get those swapped, and then we try and operate that slide again. So now if the right side starts to come in just fine and the problem is shifted over to the left side, then we know that it's not a motor problem, right? Because we initially had a problem on the right side, we swapped the connections, and now the problem has shifted to the other side. That tells us that both of these motors work. So we know that we've got either a wiring problem or we've got a problem with the controller itself. Now, remember what I said earlier, Lippert claims that they have less than 1% failure rate on these controllers. I don't have any reason to not believe that. So knowing that information, my first thought then is going to be that it's probably a wiring harness problem somewhere between the controller and the top of the motor. So again, not only can this give us a good indication of what's going on with our slide by the different error codes that we have, but we can also use it to potentially get that slide to come in if one of these faults exists. Okay, so we've talked about normal operation and we've talked about the manual electric override operation, but what happens when neither one of those work? Well, the only thing that's left is to try and just move that slide in or out using brute force. So let's take a few minutes and talk about how to do that. And this is going to be a little bit in depth and can be a little bit tricky at times, but we'll work through it. Okay, so in order to manually muscle one of these slides into place, like I said, it can be a little bit tricky and a little bit difficult, but it's definitely doable. So the way I've got this set up right now is I've got my slide probably about 3/4 of the way in, and just realize that this is not always gonna be the case. This thing could be in any position between fully extended and fully retracted. So we're gonna start with talking about how to do this if it's somewhere in between. If it's fully extended or fully retract, it's a little bit of a different problem, and we'll get to that here in just a few minutes. The whole goal here is to get the motors out of the slide, because the motors are more than likely going to prevent you from pushing this slide in or out. And ideally, to do this, we need access to both the inside and the outside of this slide. So behind this, we need to have access here, and then the same thing on the other side. If we pull this seal back right here, we can see the motor inside of the column. And the goal here is to, one, get this motor disconnected electrically. There is a set screw on the outside that we're gonna have to go out and remove. And then once we have it disconnected electrically, set screw removed, we should be able to pop this motor out of its seat and just completely remove it. So let's go out real quick and take a look at that set screw and get that thing removed, and then we'll come back inside and finish getting that motor removed. Okay, so looking at this from the outside, if we just pull this bulb seal back right here, we've got a screw right behind it, and this is the set screw for that motor. This is what keeps that motor in place when it's operating this slide in or out. So I'm not gonna be able to get this on video to remove this screw, but it's pretty self-explanatory. It's a screw. Get yourself a screwdriver and remove it. Okay, one thing I didn't show there, but before we pull this motor out, I've already got the set screw removed back there, but before you do that and before you pull this motor, you can see down in here, I just put a little mark, and that mark's just to help me get this motor back in the right position when I reinstall it. If I just line those two edges up, then the motor should go right back into place. All right, so now we've just got a regular flathead screwdriver here, and we're gonna put that on the bottom of the motor and try and just pry that thing straight up. Hopefully, I don't know if my head's in the way, guys. Sorry if it is, but. There she goes. All right. So pretty easy right there. Now we should be able to grab this motor and pull it from the inside. And you can't, there's no notch in that column to pull this motor from the outside. And that's why you have to do it from in here. And it can be a little tricky getting this thing all the way out. You gotta kind of pry it up and then try and grab it and pull the bottom of it towards the inside of the coach. And of course, we want to be careful not to damage the wiring harness at all, which can be tricky as well. There we go. So, a little bit tricky, a little bit messy, but not totally impossible. All right, so now that this is out, we can take a better look at what this wiring harness looks like. So if you remember earlier, I said that this was a common failure point on these things. So whether it's from just going down the road and bouncing around, or whether it's from, this slide constantly going in and out, this wiring harness here can come apart. Basically, well, I've seen a couple of different things. I've seen it where this wiring harness just comes out of here, and I'm not gonna disconnect it because I'm not gonna push my luck today. I've already got this thing pulled apart for no reason. So this thing can either come out of here, or sometimes you'll see that these wires get pinched or cut just from the motion back there inside of that column. And so if that happens, if this gets damaged in some way, you're either gonna need to fix that wiring harness or replace the entire motor. Now, these motors are not cheap. Now, you can go on Amazon and find these things, and they say that they're compatible, but let's be realistic here. You go on Amazon and you find one of these things and it says it's compatible with this system and it's $70, but then you go to the Lippert website and it's several $100s. Well, guess what? You get what you pay for. So I would never recommend buying one of these on Amazon. Always go through Lippert. So anyway, this is what it looks like. Again, this is a common failure point. Sometimes you don't even need to remove this motor if it stops working. You can kind of get up in there and just kind of wiggle this around and get that seated in there again, and it'll be just fine. I've seen that a few times actually. So I'm not going to move this slide in and out because I've still got another motor in there. But if you need to, like I said, physically move this slide in or out because it's not moving using the controls, once you get the motors out, you should just be able to push this slide in and out either way. So for example, if you're sitting in a campground and you're trying to get on the road, but your slide won't move, this is how you can get that slide to come in. And then once you've got the slide in, you got to make sure that you connect everything back up and get that motor reinstalled, because that's what's going to really prevent this thing from moving as you're going down the road. All right, so getting this thing back in is really just going to be the opposite of when we pulled it out. Get this thing lined up the way it's supposed to be. And obviously you want to make sure that you don't cut any of these wires when you're putting it back in or pinch them anywhere. All right, so I had a little trouble getting this in. You'll notice I had a little cut in the video there, but here's why. I'm gonna pull this back out and show you what I did. So when this motor is in there, you've got these 4 posts, and there are 4 little slots in the top of the component inside of the column. And so this thing, when it fits down in there, what can happen is when you pull that thing out of there, this motor is still gonna have just a little bit of kind of torque on it. And when you pop that up, what's likely to happen is this motor is gonna spin just a little bit. So when you go to put it back in there, it's not gonna line, these posts are not gonna line up with those holes anymore. So all I did to kind of help get this back in is I grabbed a pair of pliers, and you can see how this, the motor shaft here, right? It's like a half moon or 3/4 of a moon, 2/3, whatever. All I did was I just grabbed that with my pliers and then just applied a little bit of torque to turn this motor shaft just slightly so that these posts would line back up with the holes. I got it moved just a little bit, and now this thing just pops right back in. Now, I don't know if that's an approved Lippert procedure or not, but that was the easiest way to get this thing back in here. There we go. Now it's right back down in those slots. All right, now that that motor is seated in place, we need to be really careful about getting this wire harness tucked back up in there. And that's probably why they had it taped up in there. But we need to make sure we get that wiring harness back up in there nice and secure so that it's not, you know, moving around all over the place, and so that there's nothing pinched inside of there. And then from there, it's just a matter of getting that seal put back on there properly, and that's really about it. So I'm gonna get that seal put back in properly, and then we're gonna talk about a couple of different scenarios where this slide may be stuck in the fully extended or the fully retracted position, and we'll talk about how to get these motors out of there when you don't have access to one side or the other. Okay, so we've got this slide drawn all the way in now, and I want to go through kind of what I would consider a last ditch effort to get this slide moving if it's stuck in the in position. Now, again, I don't recommend doing this unless you have no other choice, and just realize that we're gonna break something here that's gonna have to be replaced, and we're gonna have to find that broken component before we can ever operate this slide again, because we don't want anything inside to get jammed up. So if this slide is all the way in, just like it is now, you're not gonna be able to access that set screw on the outside. It's gonna be covered up by the trim piece on the slide. So the only way to get that motor up and out of the way really is to get access to this thing on the inside. And then if we can see up here, there's this hole at the top, this oval looking hole up here at the top. And basically what you can do is, again, last ditch effort, is kind of put a screwdriver angled upward on the kind of the frame of this motor. And then you can just start hitting that screwdriver with a hammer in the upward direction, and eventually that screw should just shear right off and you can pull that motor out. So again, you can see why this would be a last ditch effort, because that screw is gonna fall down in there somewhere. You're gonna have to find the bits of that screw. I just wanted to point it out because it can be a last ditch effort to get this slide moving so that you can make some actual repairs to it. So I just want to put that disclaimer out there. This is not, this part of the video is definitely not how to, but it would be how I would do it if I had to get this slide out for some reason to be able to make additional repairs to it, and I didn't have access to that screw on the outside. Because the reality is that no matter what type of motor we have in here, these slides are extremely difficult to move without taking those motors out. So again, it's not a how-to, it's how I would do it if I was really, really in a jam. So now let's go outside. I'm gonna draw this slide all the way out, and we're gonna see what we can do if this slide is stuck in the fully extended position and we're not able to remove the motor from this side. Okay, so now let's talk about what to do if this slide is stuck all the way out and it just won't budge on either one side or both. So remember that ideally we'd have access to both the inside and the outside of this slide, but when it's stuck in this all the way out position, obviously we can't get to that motor on the inside. So one thing that you can do here, and you might need a little help with it, but we can still access this motor from out here, right? So first of all, right, we got to undo this set screw again, take that out of there, and that's going to allow the motor to move in the upward direction. And then I'm going to move the camera up here, move this slide seal out of the way a little bit, and then you can see that we still have access to this motor. So you can see right here, here's the motor. Here's the bearing block. This is one of the components that we didn't really talk about, because if repairs need to be done on this or any of the components in it, that's going to be something that you're going to want a qualified technician to do. So we really didn't talk about the bearing block on here, but you can see the motor here on top, and it sits down on top of this bearing block. And if we remove that set screw, we can still get a screwdriver in here and we can pry that motor up. And what we would do in this scenario is we would just pry this motor up enough so that the motor shaft is no longer inside of this bearing block, and effectively that removes the motor. And then what we could do from that point is you might need somebody to stay out here with the motor, and so that means you might have to have somebody on both sides with each of these motors. But once that motor is lifted up out of that bearing block, somebody can kind of sit here and just hold that thing up a little bit, and then you can get some friends or neighbors to come over here and start pushing this slide in. And then once you get this slide moved in maybe, I don't know, 6 inches or so, then you can go back around inside and you can actually pull that motor out, disconnect it, and then push this slide all the way back in. So let's just talk about maintenance now on these things. And I'll be honest with you, these things are largely maintenance free. There's really not a lot that the end user or the RV owner can do to these things as far as maintenance. But we've already talked about what the owner can do on these slides, and it's super important. And that's just to keep everything clean, free of that dust and dirt and grime, because that stuff can really gum up what's going on kind of inside of this column here, and it can cause problems getting these slides in and out. And then as far as anything else maintenance wise goes, really what you just want to keep an eye on is just when this thing is moving in and out, you want to visually verify that it's coming in and out nice and smooth. You want to come out here, listen to it. You want to be inside listening to it. And obviously you can't be in two places at once, but just occasionally have somebody outside listening and watching these things move in and out, because how these things move in and out can really tell you a lot about what's going on with this slide box. Other than that, there's really not a lot of maintenance you can do on these things. It's really just making sure that you operate them correctly. So having said all that, that's going to wrap up this segment here. If you got something out of this video, I hope you did. It's really everything you need to know about how to use these slides, how to operate them, you know, a little bit of troubleshooting, a little bit of what you can do to get these slides in and out, whether that's overriding it, whether that's doing it physically by pushing it. There's really everything that an owner really needs to know. Anything beyond what you've seen in this video right here is probably going to need a professional to come look at it, a mobile technician, or, you know, a dealership. I'm not big on the dealerships, but if that's what it takes, you know, anything beyond what we've done here in this video is probably going to take a professional to come out and do. So anyway, I hope you got something out of this video. If you did, make sure you hit that like button, make sure you hit that subscribe button, and then while you're down there, make sure you hit that bell button so that you're notified of all of our future videos. And until that future video, happy camping and stay safe out there, guys.